The wind carried a slow hum through the narrow street where all the houses looked the same, their colors fading under years of Oregon rain. Elizabeth Carter stood in the middle of her living room, surrounded by cardboard boxes, the kind that once promised new beginnings and now only whispered of departures. The smell of dust filled the air, mingled with the faint sweetness of old wood and memories she couldn't quite bring herself to pack away. A half-empty mug sat on the windowsill, the one that still said "Firefighter's Wife" in cracked red letters. She had thought about throwing it away 100 times, but her hands could never complete the motion. Some things clung to you like smoke. No matter how far you went, they followed. Outside, her 8-year-old son Tommy played with Scout, the retired fire station dog that David had brought home years ago. The golden retriever moved slower now, gray around his muzzle, but his eyes still lit up whenever Tommy threw the worn tennis ball across the yard. Scout had been David's constant companion at the station, saving lives alongside him before age had slowed them both. The dog seemed to understand loss in a way that sometimes made Elizabeth wonder if animals grieve more honestly than humans. Elizabeth watched them through the window, one hand unconsciously resting on the slight swell of her stomach. 5 months along, a secret David would never know. The baby had been conceived during their last night together, a moment of tenderness amid the wreckage of what they'd once built. Sometimes she imagined it was the universe's way of ensuring David's spirit continued. The knock at the door startled her. The postman stood there, holding a small wooden package wrapped in brown paper. "Been sitting at the post office a while," he said, handing it to her. "No return address." The box was light, yet something about it made her heart tremble. She carried it to the kitchen table and stared at it. The paper frayed and corners softened with time. Finally, she untied the string and lifted the lid. Inside was a smaller box made of wood with a leather strap around it. Carved into the top were the words, "For my boy when he's ready." Elizabeth froze. Her fingers went cold. That handwriting, she would have known it anywhere. David's. Inside the wooden box lay a stack of folded letters tied together with a thin piece of rope. She could smell the faint trace of pine, smoke, and rain, the scent of every place David had ever gone to find peace. If you're watching this story and have ever received an unexpected message from someone who's gone, we'd love to connect with you. Write where you're watching from in the comments below. The memories came unbidden, sharp, and clear. 2 years earlier, Elizabeth had stood in their bedroom doorway, watching David jolt awake from another nightmare. His t-shirt soaked with sweat, eyes wild with images she couldn't see. "The same one?" she had asked softly. David nodded, his hands trembling slightly. "I just couldn't get to them in time." The shopping mall fire had made national news. 5 people lost, including 6-year-old Lily Anderson with blonde hair and blue eyes just like Tommy's. David had carried her out, performed CPR until his arms ached, but it was too late. Something in him had broken that day, something Elizabeth couldn't reach no matter how she tried. That night, after the worst argument of their marriage, David's words still echoed in her mind. "How am I supposed to laugh at breakfast when I see ghosts at the table? How can I watch Tommy play when all I see is that little girl who'll never play again? Every time he smiles, Lizzie, every time he smiles, I feel like I'm drowning." Elizabeth had reached for him, but he'd already been too far away. "I can't breathe here," he'd said finally. "I need to find a place where I can remember who I am." 2 weeks later, divorce papers arrived. 6 months after that, the sheriff came to her door, hat in hand, with the kind of silence that spoke louder than words. "Ma'am," he'd said, "I'm afraid there's been an accident." David had fallen from a trail somewhere, deep in the mountains of Idaho, alone. No witnesses, no answers. "Mom, what's that?" Tommy's voice pulled Elizabeth back to the present. He stood in the kitchen doorway, Scout at his heels, both of them watching her with curious eyes. "Something from your dad," she whispered. The boy looked at the letters for a long time, and then without hesitation untied the rope. He chose one at random and handed it to her. "Read it," he said. The first letter was dated a year before David's death, the handwriting neat and deliberate. "Hey, buddy, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't give it to you myself. Don't be sad about that. Sometimes people don't get to finish their stories the way they plan to. But I want you to know about a place I found, a piece of sky that touched the ground. There's a mountain out here, and on top of it, I built something small. It's quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you remember you're alive. Someday, when you and your mom are ready, go there. You'll know it when you see it." Elizabeth read the second letter, then the third. Each described fragments of the same place: a narrow valley, a bend in a river, an old dirt road hidden beneath moss and branches. David wrote of a cliff where the wind feels like forgiveness, and a view that makes you believe heaven might not be so far after all. On the final letter, Tommy discovered it, a hand-drawn map folded into the corner of the page. At the bottom, David had written, "When you reach the silence, you'll find me." That night, after Tommy had gone to bed, Elizabeth opened the one envelope addressed only to her. Her name, Lizzie, written in the way only David ever called her. "I didn't leave to disappear," he'd written. "I left to build something that could hold the silence." Elizabeth stood before the bathroom mirror, her hand resting on her growing belly. "Your father built a place for healing," she whispered to the child she carried, "and we need to find it." The next morning, she told Tommy they were going on a trip. "Where?" he asked, eyes brightening with excitement. "Somewhere your father wanted you to see." They packed lightly, 2 backpacks, a tent, and David's old field jacket that still smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. Scout wagged his tail furiously when he realized he wasn't being left behind, jumping eagerly into the back seat of their old station wagon. As they drove away from the house with the for sale sign in the front yard, Elizabeth felt something shift inside her, a feeling that wasn't sorrow, but something close to purpose. The drive took 2 days. They crossed rivers and winding mountain roads, stopped at lonely gas stations where time seemed to have stopped decades ago. Tommy sat with the map on his lap, tracing their route with his finger, Scout's head resting on his shoulder. "Do you think he really built a house up there?" he asked once. "If anyone could," Elizabeth said softly, "it would have been your father." The further they drove, the thinner the air felt. Civilization fell away behind them, replaced by the steady rhythm of tires over gravel and the whisper of wind through towering pines. On the second afternoon, they entered a long, narrow canyon, the road hugging the edge of a river that shone like polished silver. Towering cliffs rose on both sides, draped in green. As dust settled, they reached a dead end where the road narrowed into a dirt path. Ahead stood a solitary ridge, smaller than the mountains around it, but strikingly steep, its top hidden by mist. Elizabeth turned off the engine. Silence fell, complete and consuming. Tommy climbed out, craning his neck upward. "Is that it?" he whispered. Elizabeth followed his gaze. The fading sunlight caught on a patch of green near the top, a hint of life against the stone. It looked impossible, unreachable, yet something in her chest told her this was the place. They set up a small camp near the base of the ridge. The night was colder than she expected, the stars burning brighter than they ever did back home. Elizabeth sat by the fire, reading one last letter David had written. "When you come, don't rush. The road is steep but kind. Every step will take something from you: fear, guilt, anger, and give you something in return. By the time you reach the top, you won't be the same. That's the point." If you've ever had to face a difficult journey, physical or emotional, to find closure, subscribe to our channel. Many of us are walking similar paths, and your story matters to this community. That night, Elizabeth couldn't sleep. She sat outside the tent, watching the ridge silhouetted against the star-filled sky. Her mind wandered back to their final weeks together. The silences at dinner. David sitting alone in the garage late at night, staring at incident reports. Once she had found him crying, but when she approached, he quickly wiped his eyes and said he was fine. The invisible wall between them had grown stronger with each passing day. She remembered the funeral for little Lily Anderson. David had stood at the back, apart from the other firefighters, his face a mask of composure that crumbled the moment they returned to the car. "I wasn't fast enough," he had whispered, so quietly she almost missed it. "I wasn't fast enough." Elizabeth placed her hand over her belly, feeling the slight flutter of movement inside. "Your father didn't know how to bring that pain home," she whispered. "He thought he was protecting us." Morning crept over the valley slowly, spilling light across the mist that hung low above the river. The world was painted in silver and pale blue, and the air smelled like damp earth and pine. Elizabeth boiled water for tea on a small stove, watching the steam curl upward and dissolve into the cold air. For a moment she stood still, listening. There was no hum of traffic, no voices, just the sound of the river and the faint call of a bird somewhere high above. It was a silence that didn't feel empty. It felt aware, as if the land itself was waiting. When Tommy crawled out of the tent, his hair tousled and eyes still heavy with sleep, she smiled. "You ready?" He nodded, clutching the folded map in his small hands. Scout was already alert, tail wagging, sensing the adventure ahead. The dog had been unusually energetic since they'd arrived, as if he somehow knew they were closer to David here. They left the tent behind, taking only what they needed: a backpack with food, water, a blanket, and the letters. The road began gently enough, covered in gravel and half buried by grass. As they walked, the sun rose higher, pushing away the mist and revealing the texture of the world around them: moss glistening on rocks, ferns trembling under drops of dew. But the further they went, the steeper the climb became. Soon the soft earth turned to loose stone, and every step sent tiny echoes bouncing down the slope behind them. Tommy walked ahead with Scout, stopping occasionally to point out discoveries: strange-shaped rocks, colorful mushrooms, a hawk circling overhead. Elizabeth followed quietly, her breath growing shorter, one hand often resting on her belly. The rhythm of the climb had a strange effect on her. With each step, something loosened inside her chest, as if each breath pushed a small piece of the past further away. Around midday, the weather changed abruptly. Dark clouds rolled in, the wind picked up, and the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. "We need to find shelter," Elizabeth called to Tommy, who had climbed a few yards ahead with Scout. The path had narrowed dangerously, loose rocks sliding underfoot. As the rain intensified, Tommy turned to head back down toward her and slipped. For a heart-stopping moment, he teetered at the edge of a steep drop, arms windmilling. Scout lunged forward, grabbing the hem of his jacket as Elizabeth scrambled up the path, her heart in her throat. Together they pulled him to safety, all three collapsing on the narrow trail as rain poured down around them. "I've got you," Elizabeth whispered, holding Tommy tight against her. "I've got you." Scout whined and licked Tommy's face, then suddenly perked up, ears forward. He barked once, then trotted a few yards up the path, looking back expectantly. "I think he wants us to follow," Tommy said, his voice still shaky. Scout led them to a small opening in the rock face, a shallow cave just deep enough to shelter them from the rain. Inside, they found evidence someone had been there before: a small circle of stones for a fire pit and a pile of dry wood stacked neatly against the wall. "Dad was here," Tommy whispered, running his fingers over the stones. As Elizabeth lit a small fire, Tommy explored the back of the cave, where he found something wedged into a crevice: a weathered leather notebook. Inside, in David's handwriting, were dated entries from the months he spent building the house. One passage caught Elizabeth's eye. "I'm not building this house to run away. I'm building it to find my way back." Tucked between the pages was a yellowed receipt, a land purchase dated 3 weeks before their final argument, before she even knew he was thinking of leaving. David had been planning this place long before their separation, not as an escape, but as something else entirely. "He bought the land before he left us," Elizabeth murmured, showing Tommy the receipt. "This wasn't just some impulse after we separated. He was building this place for a reason." A sharp pain suddenly gripped her abdomen, and Elizabeth gasped, doubling over. "Mom!" Tommy's voice was tight with fear. "Is it the baby?" Elizabeth nodded, breathing slowly through the contraction. "It's okay," she reassured him, though uncertainty flickered through her mind. "The baby's just reminding us to be careful." They waited out the storm in the cave, Tommy sitting close to his mother, Scout lying protectively at their feet. As the rain drummed outside, Tommy looked up with serious eyes. "Mom, did you and Dad stop loving each other because you didn't understand him?" The question came so suddenly that Elizabeth almost couldn't find her voice. She turned to him, seeing in his face not accusation, but simple curiosity. "It's not that I stopped loving your father," she said slowly. "It's that I didn't know how to love his pain. I wanted him to come back to who he was before, but he couldn't go back. He was somewhere else, and I didn't know how to follow." Tommy was quiet for a long time. Then he said very softly, "Maybe he didn't want to go back. Maybe he just wanted you to see where he went." Elizabeth looked at her son, surprised by the calm wisdom in his voice. She reached out and brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "Maybe you're right," she whispered. "Sometimes our children understand what we can't see ourselves." Has a child ever shared wisdom that changed your perspective? If this story touches your heart, please subscribe. We share new stories every week. When the storm passed, they continued their climb. The path grew steeper, narrower, but somehow their steps felt lighter. Scout led the way, stopping occasionally to make sure they were following, his tail a metronome of encouragement. They found more signs of David's presence. Small stacks of stones carefully balanced, a knife mark on a tree with his initials, the remains of old camp spots. Each discovery felt like a breadcrumb, leading them upward. The last stretch of path was the hardest. They had to walk single file, gripping rocks for balance as the wind tugged at their clothes. But with every step, they could feel they were getting closer. Scout barked excitedly, disappearing around a bend in the path. At last, as the sun began its westward tilt, they reached the top of the ridge. There, nestled between two large stones, like a secret held in cupped hands, stood a small wooden house. It wasn't large or grand, just a cabin made of rough timber, its roof covered in moss, its windows slightly fogged with dust. But it stood firm against the wind, like something that had waited patiently for their arrival. Elizabeth's breath caught in her chest. "He did it," Tommy whispered in awe. "He really did it." Scout was already circling the cabin, tail wagging furiously as he sniffed the perimeter, racing from spot to spot as if reconnecting with a familiar place. Elizabeth remembered how David would take Scout camping on his days off. Now she wondered if they had been up here together, building this sanctuary stone by stone. Have you ever discovered something unexpected that changed how you viewed someone you thought you knew? Share your experience in the comments. Your insights might help others see their own stories differently. Tommy ran forward, stopping at the door, then calling out, "Mom, there's a garden!" She followed him around the side. Indeed, a small patch of land had been carefully tended, rows of herbs, vegetables, wildflowers scattered between them. The soil was still dark and soft, as though someone had only recently touched it. Beyond the garden, a wooden bench faced the edge of the cliff. From there, the view stretched endlessly. The valley, the river, faraway ridges fading into light. Elizabeth walked to the door and pushed it open. It creaked softly. Inside, the air was cool and faintly scented with ash and cedar. The room was simple: a bed made of wood, a table, a stove, and shelves lined with books and jars. Sunlight fell through the window, landing on the table where a notebook lay open. She stepped closer. The handwriting inside was unmistakably David's. If she ever reads one of my letters, she'll understand. I didn't leave to disappear. I left to build something that could hold the silence. Tommy moved quietly through the small room, examining everything with reverence. On a shelf, he found an old cassette player, the kind David used to keep in the garage. Taped to it was a note, "For Lizzie." Elizabeth's hands shook as she pressed the play button. The machine crackled, then came to life with a faint hiss. "Hey, Lizzie," David's voice said, soft and familiar. "If you're hearing this, then you made it. I knew you would." Elizabeth pressed her hand to her mouth, her breath trembling. "I wanted to explain, but I never found the words," his voice continued. "Every time I looked at Tommy, I saw Lily Anderson's face. Those same blue eyes, that same smile. How could I explain that to either of you? How could I tell our son that his face reminded me of my greatest failure?" There was a pause, the sound of David taking a deep breath. "This place, it's helping me remember how to breathe without the sound of alarms in my head. I hope someday you'd find it and see what I saw. Tell Tommy I love him. Tell him he doesn't need to be brave the way I was. That's harder, but it lasts longer." Another pause, longer this time. "And you, Lizzie, you were the one thing I never stopped missing." The tape clicked and went silent. Elizabeth stood there, the sound of the wind slipping through the cracks of the cabin, the only thing breaking the silence. Tommy wrapped his arms around her waist. "He's not gone, Mom," he whispered. "He's right here." As the day faded to dusk, Scout barked sharply from outside. Tommy ran to investigate, calling back excitedly, "Mom, Scout found something." Near a large pine tree, the dog had begun to dig, uncovering a small metal box buried just beneath the surface. Inside was a stack of family photos, David's wedding ring, and a half-written letter dated just 3 days before his accident. Elizabeth read it with trembling hands. "The mountains have done their work. It's time to bring what I've learned here back home to them. I think I'm ready to love them the way they deserve to be loved. Tomorrow I'll start the journey back." A sob escaped her throat as the realization washed over her. David had been coming home. The accident happened when he was preparing to return to them. That night they didn't sleep inside. Instead, they spread a blanket outside the cabin and lay under the open sky. The stars burned fiercely, untouched by city light. Scout lay curled at their feet, his rhythmic breathing a comfort in the vast silence. Elizabeth held Tommy close, feeling the steady beat of his heart. For years, she had lived with the weight of loss pressing against her chest. Now, for the first time, she felt space inside her again. A quiet, gentle space where something new could grow. "Mom," Tommy's voice was soft in the darkness. "Can we come back here again?" Elizabeth looked out at the silhouette of the mountains against the star-filled sky. She thought of the garden, the house, the unborn child she carried, all parts of a story that wasn't ending, but transforming. "Not just come back," she said softly. "We'll keep it alive." She began to envision it clearly. Weekends spent here throughout the seasons, bringing supplies up the mountain, teaching Tommy to care for the garden, perhaps building a small addition for the baby. Making the journey up the cliff part of their story, not just David's. "We could plant new things in spring," Tommy said, excitement growing in his voice, "and fix the windows before winter." Elizabeth smiled in the darkness. "Yes, and maybe put a swing on that big pine tree." Life often gives us unexpected gifts, even after great loss. Has someone who's gone left you something precious? A memory, an insight, a place that brings you peace? Share in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. At dawn, the horizon turned pale pink, and the first light touched the roof of the cabin. Elizabeth sat up and watched it, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. Tommy was still asleep beside her, Scout keeping watch at his feet. She thought of all the mornings she had woken in their old house, heavy with the feeling that something was missing. Now, on this ridge where the world stretched wide and unbroken, she felt whole. When Tommy stirred, she brushed his hair from his forehead. "Time to go, sweetheart," she said. Before leaving, Elizabeth walked to the edge of the cliff one last time. The valley was waking below, light spreading through the trees like water through roots. She took a deep breath, the kind that fills you all the way to the heart. "You didn't leave me," she whispered to the wind. "You showed me how to stay." The descent was easier than the climb. Every turn, every stone carried a memory of the journey up, but also something new, a sense of return rather than departure. As they reached the bottom, Tommy looked back. The cabin was just a small dot now, framed by sunlight, almost magical in its unlikeliness. "It looks smaller from here," he said. Elizabeth smiled. "Things often do once you've carried them inside you." They stood there for a long moment, watching the ridge. Elizabeth placed a hand on her belly, feeling the gentle movement of the baby inside. A life that would never know its father, and yet would know him in ways that mattered most. "Your father built this place not to escape us," she told Tommy, "but to find his way back to us. Now it's our turn to keep it alive." As they walked away, the sound of their footsteps faded into the whisper of the river. The ridge stood quiet behind them, the cabin hidden among the trees, its small garden waiting patiently for the seeds to grow. For the first time in years, Elizabeth didn't feel the need to look back. She knew that the place would always be there, not just on the map or in the mountains, but in the quiet space between their hearts where healing begins. By the time they reached the car, the sun was high, and the world ahead shimmered with light. Tommy opened the door for Scout, who jumped in eagerly, ready for the journey home. Elizabeth started the engine, and as the car moved forward along the winding road, she caught a glimpse of the ridge in the rearview mirror, solid, unchanging, and now forever part of their story. "Mom?" Tommy asked as they drove. "Dad's not really gone, is he?" Elizabeth reached over and squeezed his hand. "No, honey, he's not gone. He just found a different way to stay." And as the mountains faded behind them, Elizabeth felt the baby move again. A gentle reminder that even in the deepest loss, life finds a way to continue. David's final gift wasn't just the house on the cliff. It was showing them that some love doesn't fade with absence. It changes form, finding new ways to speak. Before they left the mountains entirely, Elizabeth pulled over at a small general store. Inside, she bought seeds, gardening tools, and a notebook. "What are those for?" Tommy asked. "For next time," she said. "We'll need to plant something new when we return. That's what your father would have wanted." As they drove back toward Oregon, Elizabeth was already making plans, arranging for a realtor to halt the sale of their house, researching small schools near the Idaho border where they might relocate, imagining a future that bridged between the life they'd had and the one David had been building. Not running from the past or clinging to it, but transforming it into something new, just as David had transformed his pain into this sanctuary on the cliff. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Share this video with someone who still believes that healing is possible, even after the deepest wounds. Sometimes the most beautiful views come after the steepest climbs,